pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Next up is approval of agenda for this morning's meeting. Do we have a motion?
The board adopt the agenda as presented.
Okay.
We've got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the agenda? Seeing and hearing nothing, please. We have Sandra somewhere.
AJ.
Hello? Can you hear me? Yes.
Scott.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Angie. Angie, you're muted.
Yes.
Thank you. Nick.
Yes.
Kim Marie.
Yes.
And Andy.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think our computers and our brains are still waking up this morning. It sounds like an episode of Star Trek or something. All right, we've got some minutes from May 19th to approve. Do we have a motion?
I
Move the board.
adopt the meeting minutes of May 19th, 2020.
Second.
All right, we got a motion and a second. Anyone have any questions or comments on those minutes? Seeing and hearing nothing, vote please.
AJ.
Yes.
Scott.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Angie.
Yes.
Nick.
Yes.
Kim Marie.
Yes.
Andy.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, we're into the study session now, 2.01 updates. Dr. Tucker.
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and sorry for the technical difficulties. I think we're squared away as far as the Star Trek echo. We did want to provide an opportunity this morning for Cabinet to provide updates before we dive into the remainder of our agenda items. So we wanted to start off with academic services. And so I believe this month, Dr. Dixon Seahorn is going to share out in respect to a few items that academic services is working on. So Dr. Dixon Seahorn.
Can I be heard? Am I don't need to, okay. Just wanted to say good morning to everyone. We do have just a few highlights to share with you that were posted on Friday in our board update, but I just wanted to bring special attention to those items. Dr. Moore will go into commencement updates later in this session on this morning, but did want to just highlight the fact that at the Early Childhood Center that we are very, very, very excited about the expansion of the 4% state-funded classrooms from 2 classrooms this current year, and we'll transition into 4 classrooms for next year, where we will be able to serve 80 students. So we're very, very, very excited about that. We do have some capital improvements that are going on over at the ECC this summer to make room for those classrooms. We also have appropriate staffing now allocated for that, and so we are excited to launch that next year, whether we're virtual or face-to-face. Also wanted to bring attention to summer school. We're very excited about this because right now, as you know, we are in virtual mode. And so we do have approximately 450 elementary students that are currently enrolled in summer school, whether they're attending the AM session or the PM session. We also have about 350 middle school students that are working on PBLs this summer. So this is, never before seen. And so we're just pleased that we can offer this to families. And then also, as you know, we're planning for some form of face-to-face or virtual, depending on where we are with current guidelines for social distancing and other protocols that need to be adhered to for July. And right now we have about 1,500 students, grades K through 8, that are enrolled for those sessions coming up. Last thing we wanted to highlight was Apple professional development for teachers as well as parents. As we're making the transition into using our iPads, particularly at the middle school level, we are offering free, there's free training that's going to be available for teachers as well as parents so that they'll just understand how to use this technology. So that will be happening this summer, again, for parents and teachers. So those are our highlights from academic services. And if there are any questions, we're all available to answer.
Any questions from the board for academic services this morning before we move on? Okay. Seeing none, then we will move on. Thank you, Dr. Dixon-Seahorn. Mr. Anderson, as far as operations updates?
Yes, good morning. Most of my update is going to come by way of the reentry planning discussion in a few minutes. So really the only thing I was going to mention other than that is just a really quick update on construction right now, which other than a good handful of capital projects kind of spread throughout the district, much of our attention right now is at Liberty High School and trying to get that space up and ready for the start of school. And again, continue to be encouraged by the reports we're receiving over there, especially back on the PAC project and the Fine Arts Wing. Everything's still on track for where we want it to be as we get ready for August. Obviously, there's a fair amount of work that has to happen between now and then, but right now, as it stands, we feel like we're in a pretty good position. In addition, you may have seen we sent something out, I think, a few days ago out front at Liberty High School. We are beginning the project and work in and around the 800s renovation and the atrium renovation and the LMC roof renovation. So it's a little bit cluttered over there and moving traffic through and kind of cordoning off the area so that it's safe. So it'll be a little bit complicated over the few months. And again, that will bleed into the fall. And we have some plans in place coordinating between our construction team and the folks at the building and safety and security. Just to make sure that proper traffic flow and egress and everything is maintained. So everything's in place as it needs to be, again, as we roll into it, but there are still some uncertainties as we move into construction, as there always is. But at this time, we feel pretty confident that that work will occur. Much of the heavy lift or disruptive part will occur before the start of school. And then into probably a couple months into the fall, we'll still have crews on site as they finish up that work. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions of Steve this morning? Okay, thank you, Mr. Anderson. Next up then, Ms. Sullivan on the finance front.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to report that last week we did receive our stimulus money from the county. So that was $1.2 million that we have to spend by December 30th on pandemic-related expenses. So we have been working through some of that in cabinet, trying to make the best use of that money to figure all of that out. Our application for the state CARES money and assurances was approved last week as well. So that's another $280,000 that we have to devote to expenditures related getting up and running. So same goes for that. We're working on how best to spend that one. We have a little longer to spend it. It actually goes through 9/30 of 2022. So rest assured it will be gone long before that, but we do have a little bit longer to figure that one out. I also wanted to let you know we have one Audit and Finance Committee member rolling off this year. Application did close on Friday, and we do have one applicant. So we'll be working with Sandra to figure out how we're going to interview that applicant when we go through the month of June to see if we want to appoint that person to the committee. You do have the ability as a committee to have anywhere from 5 to 7 people on the committee. Currently, we have 7, so one will be rolling off to make 6. So you could choose to appoint the applicant or to appoint no one. That is your prerogative after you interview the applicant. So more to come on that. I wanted to let you know that our county revenue collection rate ending in FY20 is going to be down about 1.5%. When I talked with the county collector's office, their whole collections are off about that. No explanation why. I feel confident that we received everything we were supposed to receive as far as what they collected. So that hopefully will be made up in delinquent taxes next year. But with everything that's going on, I don't know if that's a good thing to bank on at this point either. Yesterday afternoon, we did learn that the governor has made withholdings to the state budget, and that majority of that came from the education budget, unfortunately. So from the foundation formula, he withheld $123 million. Most of that obviously will come from the June payment. That will be creating about a $2.2 million shortfall in our anticipated formula revenue that we were to collect this year. Of that, 1.3 million will be taken out of our June payment. So that is not something we anticipated happening in June, but we'll be okay moving forward with that. This year, we have plenty of budget in the revenue to cover our expenditures. So not good news, but we'll weather it, we'll get through it, and it will be okay to go. We still do have a meeting today at 9:30 with the governor, probably to give some details on that. We have not heard anything yet about any withholdings for next year. That is still a potential, I would imagine, but we'll wait and see what he has to say today. And that's about all the good news I can give you today, unfortunately, unless you have any questions for me.
And just to add to Cindy, I appreciate her efforts. Yesterday evening, we were going back and forth a little bit, trying to process the news release that was pushed out by the governor late yesterday afternoon and the total impact on the district. As Cindy mentioned, this next wave of withholdings we learned about yesterday primarily impacts June payment for school districts. It equates to about a 39% reduction in the June payment through the foundation formula dispersed to districts, which is a pretty significant hit. And then, of course, Cindy shared the impact to our district in terms of lost revenue that then we end up realizing out of our June payment. The only other thing that I would say is in years past, when we've talked about budget withholdings or reductions from the state level, in the state statute and through our foundation formula disbursements, there typically is a hold harmless provision that goes all the way back to the prior formula, and that districts were not to receive any less than what they previously received under the old formula. However, in this instance, the governor has waived that hold harmless provision. And in essence, what that means is that there is no district that is not being impacted by the withholding in their June payment. And so it's a little bit of spreading that out across all districts rather than protecting those districts that were impacted by that hold harmless provision from the previous foundation formula. And so it was a little bit of a surprise to us when we saw that yesterday afternoon released. But again, thanks to Cindy and her efforts in trying to look at the impact of that even yesterday evening, trying to crank those numbers out. And then we'll see what the governor's press conference or call this morning relays, if he just speaks to this current round of withholdings or whether we get additional information in and around FY21. So we'll give you a recap or a summary of that as soon as we're off the phone with the governor this morning to relay both yesterday's news and any additional news that we get from this morning's call. Any questions of Cindy on the finance front?
Yeah, I mean, I know you guys are going to come with a recommendation on how to spend that stimulus dollar, so this isn't a question about what you're going to do with that. But I mean, can I assume correctly that a withholding of June's payment is an impact from the pandemic, and we could leverage that just against that shortfall?
I think June's withholding is a reflection of the pandemic. The stimulus money right now is not revenue replacement in that regard, but so you can't just sock it away. You do have to spend it on something COVID related. That can be many, many things. It could be salaries. It could be supplies. It could be buses. But it needs to be something you might not have purchased. So.
Gotcha. That's fair. Okay.
And we'll bring that forward to you as we look to how to expend those funds. And then also keep in mind with those federal stimulus dollars, whether it was back in 08, 09 or the present state we're in, there are pretty rigid, stringent requirements that are placed upon districts and how those are accounted for, which we appreciate certainly. Not only that and how we're managing those dollars dispersed through our title allocation, but then also as it relates to funds that we receive by way of the county. So we'll certainly be reporting that both to the board, but then also to the county for their awareness. So, other questions of Cindy?
Yeah, Cindy, I think I was tracking there. So the 1.5 in stimulus, we may have some limitations on how we apply those dollars. The 2.2 million from Missouri that we're going to wind up short for the year. I think you said that we had other revenue to cover that for the current year, or does that mean we need to dip into I mean, anytime you don't have $2.2 million, your net reserve is lower, right?
Yes,
Do we have revenue?
We had a balanced budget last year, so our revenue coming in was more than our expenditures. So that at this point should not dip. With the savings of the things we're not spending in the fourth quarter, we should not be dipping into our reserves at the end of FY20. We may not be growing our reserves as much as we hoped because of the lack of spending, but they may just barely offset each other so that we won't be dipping in.
Okay. And I'm assuming that the state has to get to a balanced budget. So if there's a bunch of money that doesn't get collected on April 15th for a normal tax collection that gets collected on July 15, that could have a significant impact on the current year, but it's actually pushing to next year. The story could be pretty severe for the next year budget too. So
Correct.
Really don't know yet for 2021.
We do not, and they keep, by kicking that can down the road to everything happening in July, they've just made the unknowns even greater for next year. And rest assured then that will carry over to FY22 as well, because they just keep pushing it down the road until the economy flips back in sales tax and collections and everything gets righted to the correct year. It's just going to keep traveling down the road.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, and it'd be nice if you had a more complete picture for the year you're about to start.
It would be great, but I wish I had a crystal ball, but maybe I don't at this point either. So
maybe you'll get to sleep next year.
Maybe.
There is another piece to the puzzle, and that is about 10% of funding that the state receives through federal stimulus dollars, upon which they have some discretion on how those funds are expended. And so initially, a month ago, we were hearing that those dollars could be used by the Department of Ed or the governor's office to be able to work on technology needs and infrastructure, to be able to level districts in terms of their technology capabilities. Just as of yesterday, there was some speculation that 10% may then come to the state that then could be used in some way to somehow plug this hole in terms of funding the foundation formula. We don't know, but we may get clarity around that later this morning. So There may be a way to leverage CARES Act money, be it for the technology needs of districts across the state or in an effort to try to diminish the impact that school districts are realizing through this latest withholding. So again, thank you to Cindy for staying close to that, and we will do a wrap back for the board just to provide you a summary of everything that we've learned between yesterday and later today. So other questions for Cindy before we move on? Okay, thank you, Cindy. Next up then, last but not least, Dr. Vogelaar on the HR front.
Thank you very much. I want to assure you, first of all, these cabinet reports are not in order of good news to bad news. So maybe we should have saved Cindy's news till the end. A lot of what HR is working on right now is related to the reentry plan. I know Steve Anderson's going to be talking at depth about that, but just to highlight some of the things we're working on. With regard to the Network for Educator Effectiveness, as you know, that probably about 99% of all the classroom observations in the district through our teacher evaluation system conclude at the end of February, so pre-pandemic. We had really, matriculated almost that entire process. Well, because we don't exactly know what the fall is going to look like, we're needing to kind of revisit how would classroom observations, a big component of the Network for Educator Effectiveness in classroom observations, and obviously the requirements under policy for frequent feedback, how would administrators carry that out? So we're working through those details. We're working in partnership with NEA, MSTA, obviously, on that with the University of Missouri, who sponsors the Network for Educator Effectiveness, and with surrounding districts. There's a pretty extensive network there, and we're all trying to look at what those indicators could look like in a virtual type realm, but also obviously keeping the fidelity of the existing classroom observations, so that really at the flip of a switch, administrators are trained and equipped to go back and forth and execute that with fidelity. In addition to that, obviously, there are other aspects that we have to anticipate, increases in absenteeism and plans for virtual work in those situations so that we can maintain productivity. So my department is working extensively on what that workload could look like. That will include some gathering of information from staff, and then also just training and cross-training our staff to be ready for an increase in volume in that regard. Contract readiness obviously is a big part of that. The team is going to make sure that we're ready on July 1 to get those contracts out. It will be a little bit unique in that we're gathering that data from employees over the summer months, but all of the models I've looked at so far indicate that we should have no problem within about a 10-day window of getting a complete turnaround of whatever the decision is on June 30, or when that decision comes regarding salaries, we'll be ready to issue those contracts and extra duty letters. We've got some positions that we're working to fill. Obviously, we just filled the Director of School Age Care, and that new incumbent will be starting next Monday, June 8th. We're very excited to have her on board and kind of transition that partnership from Nancy over to Tanika starting next week on June 8th. The next leadership position we're working to fill is the assistant principal position at Manor Hill. Valerie Utek has done a phenomenal job of screening all of those candidates and interviewing a good number of them face-to-face through Zoom. She's advanced some candidates to Dr. Dixon Seahorn's and my attention, and we're ready to move into the next stage, what we hope is the final stage of that process as well. That would round out our leadership positions that we're working to fill right now. Other things happening, obviously, in a little bit, we're going to be talking about the work of the GYOT, the Grow Your Own Teacher Program team, that what we called 2.0. We'll talk in depth about that. And then also with regard to our annual compliance report, Dr. Smith is here also to share as part of that as well. So we'll get more into those later on in the agenda. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them regarding that report.
Anything for Dr. Vogelaar? Okay, thank you, Bob. Just in respect to my items are really a byproduct of cabinet in working closely with each of them, certainly from a budget perspective, reentry, which we'll hear a little bit about later on, and reorganization. I do want to point out a couple of key things that occurred late last week and this week. The first of which was appreciate Dr. Moore and Colleen Jones, Dr. Westfall, and Christopher Hand, and others that helped with the real-world learning pitch to the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation. As you know, we've been working with them and Getting Smart, along with districts across the region, to see how we can advance real-world learning opportunities for our students, and really continuing to keep this a priority as it's reflected in our strategic plan, even during this time of pandemic, by way of thinking about how we might be able to continue to provide those opportunities even in a virtual environment, so virtual internships, for example, or virtual connection, virtual projects with clients. So continuing to think through that then catapults us into the next several years as we look to ensure that every student within the district upon graduation not only receives their diploma, but at least one market value asset. So again, thank you to the team for helping with that. It's done, but yet now the work begins in terms of how we go about ensuring those market value assets are accomplished or achieved. The second thing that I would mention, and Dr. Meisenheimer is not on the meeting this morning, but she relayed yesterday that the Children's Services Fund board approved the district's grant over a 2-year window for $3.8 million, I believe it is. And so we were thinking yesterday as a strategic leadership team over the course of the last few years, really, just the amount of grant funding that we have engaged in as a district, from KC Tech Academy to a couple of opportunities with the Kaufman Foundation to working with the Children's Services Fund. We have grown our non-traditional resource base through funding dollars, and that will only continue to increase if you equate federal stimulus dollars in a similar grant fashion, so to speak, and that those revenues come for a period, but then they exit the district as well. So a little bit more as we dive into reentry and reorganization later on in the agenda, but we certainly open it up for any questions the board may have of me this morning. Okay, I think that concludes that portion, Mr. Hoffman.
All right, then we are ready for the presentation on the annual compliance report 2.02.
So appreciate the Human Resources Department for bringing this forward as part of an annual report to the district. I know we've got a couple of folks on the meeting this morning from HR, Dr. Vogelaar, as well as Dr. Smith. Appreciate Dr. Smith being here this morning. I'm going to share our screen and the slide deck that was included, and then turn it over to you, Dr. Vogelaar.
Thank you very much, and I'll wait till that comes up and just cue you to flip through those slides as we do that. So one of the requirements of policy AC, and I think it's a good requirement, is that the compliance officer report out to the superintendent and board of education, with regard to number of complaints, frequency year over year of those complaints, and compliance with policy AC. And so we added as a position Dr. Smith to the team, and that was because previous to Dr. Smith, if it was a student-initiated complaint, that was handled in the Student Services Department. If it was a student-initiated complaint involving a special education student, that was handled out of the Special Ed Department. And then if it was an employee complaint, it was handled out of the HR department. This was an opportunity to bring all of that under one umbrella. And the purpose, of course, is to manage all of the complaints that would come forward, investigate those in a timely manner, and then report out in cases where claims are substantiated remedies that would bring closure for whoever the complainant is, remedy with regard to respondents, and ensure that as a system we grow and develop. We want to be a system, obviously, that is free of discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. So Dr. Smith came on board. As you know, you got to know Dr. Smith. He was a phenomenal addition to our team. He brings tremendous skill and asset to the school district. And the component that we've been trying to work out is just how do we present results to the board in compliance with that policy. For a while, we were thinking on a monthly level, but it can create kind of some false conclusions drawn because you don't have control over when complaints come to the school district. And so we landed on kind of an annual review of that. So the purpose of this presentation this morning is to provide that annual review of grievances that are reported to Dr. Smith. But I do want to talk a little bit about the process that Policy AC does provide. It provides a process that staff, students, patrons have an opportunity to have their concerns heard, investigated, and resolved in a timely manner. In policy, that means 30 days is the typical time frame for those investigations to conclude. We've always been able to manage under that 30-day window, even when this was parceled out across departments. But having Dr. Smith there ensures that that many of these resolve in a time frame much more timely. That's the strategy of this. It provides a streamlined approach for the grievance process. It allows for consistency and that kind of one individual that you would go to, and we advertise and publicize that one person. It makes it very easy for anybody to know who to connect with in those investigations, and that does streamline that. And then, of course, the benefit of it is you have someone who is doing more than just investigating. They're looking at compliance in general across the district and providing training for administrators in all areas of district compliance. And then also he becomes a consultant for district leaders as they have questions. Many times they know exactly who to pick up the phone and call and get that guidance. So we see the benefit of that as well. Dr. Smith's training as an attorney also means that he's equipped to manage a lot of that consultative role without the need to seek outside counsel and ratchet up the bill in that regard. So with that, this is the annual review. I've asked Dr. Smith to come here and speak to that. So if Dr. Tucker would flip to the next slide, I'll turn it over to Dr. Smith to go over the AC complaints that he's received this year and how they were investigated and how they turned out. Dr. Smith?
Well, Dr. Vogler, Dr. Tucker, board, thank you for having me. What you'll see here in this data is that over the course of this school year, we have 37 complaints or grievances that were filed. There are 5 that are currently open that I'm currently investigating. Of the 32 that have been closed out, 27 have been unsubstantiated, meaning there was no finding of a violation of board policy, and then 5 of those claims were substantiated, or roughly just under 14%. Dr. Tucker, if you want to move to the next slide. My findings in those investigations were of the 5 that were substantiated, 4 of them were violations of board policy GBCB, which is our staff conduct policy of maintaining courteous and professional relationships. 1 was a violation of policy KL, which is published annually. It's our general grievance policy, that there is a substantiated finding, but none of the findings this year were substantiated under board policy AC. So that's the information that has been incurred or developed this year, and we'll continue to provide you this information, as Dr. Vogler said, on an annual basis.
I'll add that most all complaints tend to come, and Dr. Smith can elaborate on this as well. They come to him in the form of a policy AC complaint. Somebody comes in and says, I'm being harassed or I'm being picked on. Students might come in and say, I'm being bullied, and they start under that umbrella of a prohibition against discrimination, harassment, retaliation. But the definition within that policy is it's a legal definition. It's a very precisely worded definition for good reason. And so what oftentimes he discovers is that the complaint really is about somebody has engaged in conduct prohibited by the district. And so that's when it would pivot over to a policy GBCB inquiry. The policy KL it has a complaints component and has a retaliation component. And so in some cases when the definition is not met in policy AC, but you still have an issue that needs to be resolved or addressed, it might fall under a policy KL or some of the J policies with regard to student issues as well. And so part of Dr. Smith's role is to kind of be that goalie, so to speak, as he is able to still find a way to provide relief and remedy for people who might not technically have a complaint under policy AC, but still have a legitimate complaint that's captured somewhere in policy. And so his familiarity with all policy obviously is a big part of the success of his success in that role as well. Because this is the first time we're giving an annual review of this data, we aren't exactly sure how this meets your needs or if it meets your needs. And so we do want to open the floor for questions for Dr. Smith, if there are any, before we wrap up this annual review.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Smith, for that review. I do have a question about the substantiated claims. So I know in an organization of this size, we would prefer to have 0. But 5 total is not a huge number. But were you able to draw conclusions about any additional training or additional actions that we can take to prevent future situations from reoccurring?
That's a great question. And what's not in this deck is for the beginning next school year, we are hosting 5 different trainings that are scheduled. And that's a proactive measure. One is an annual compliance training that we do under policy AC. One training that we're developing right now with one of our law partners is to address potential concerns with the upcoming presidential election in terms of how to manage free speech. And then there's some other topics as well, including I'm doing another training with Dr. Bressman on when we have disciplinary issues to make sure that we're consistent in our approach. So there are a variety of proactive solutions that you don't see in this presentation that we're working on for next school year. In fact, and one final one we're doing is Mr. Rosecrans and I are doing a training on how you do a general investigation. And the reason we're doing that for our district leaders and our building principals is if a complaint doesn't rise to a level that it's an AC violation, it's something that needs to be looked into either from a student perspective or even on a staff perspective. How do we ensure that we have consistency? So that training schedule has been developed. It was reviewed by Dr. Seahorn, Dr. Moore, and approved by Dr. Westfald as well. And that training schedule has been tentatively published for next year. So proactively, we're looking at that already, and we're developing those trainings for the upcoming school year.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And quickly, this is Scott, and I appreciate the time taken to put this together. My question is around what you're reporting on. Is my understanding you're reporting on all the complaints that rose to a level of policy violation. Is there a way that we can kind of get a sense of how many complaints you're getting total, and saying, of these 24, 5 of them rose to this level, and of the other 19 were X, Y, or Z? I'm trying to get a sense of kind of what you have to deal with on a regular basis and what really doesn't, falls outside of this.
Yeah, that's a great question, because obviously Dr. Smith can't investigate what never comes to his attention. And so he has created some systems, computer-based systems, to allow leaders to trap things that ordinarily might be handled in a building and not brought to his attention, so that he can capture that information. So Dr. Smith, I'll let you elaborate on that.
So one of the things when I transitioned into this role that we found is Dr. Vogelaar said, is that we had complaints that were being reported in a variety of different through a variety of different ways. So for complaints that don't rise to a formal AC level, we have developed a second set of systems for our building administrators to use, specifically under the district's anti-bullying policy or bullying policy, as well as those under the Student Discipline Code of Conduct, which is the JGR policies. So in those cases where there's allegations of that for student-on-student bullying, we have a separate system that houses those complaints. If one of those complaints were to rise to a level of an AC concern, then it would come to my attention. But we've developed that system specifically based upon the state of Missouri's bullying or anti-bullying statutes, and we've developed a second set of priorities or system for reporting, so where administrators can log in and determine if something rises to a level of whether it meets the legal threshold of harassment, or if it doesn't meet the student code of conduct level of harassment. And the board, as you guys are obviously aware, is we made those changes in August to reflect some of that in the student code of conduct. So that reporting is in a separate set that in those cases, if it doesn't rise to an AC level, and I monitor those as well. Just for background, we had roughly about 60 of those concerns on the student code of conduct side of things that were investigated or looked into by building administrators. And the point Dr. Voglar made in the previous slide is I consult with building administrators to make sure that they're following through and looking at those definitions. And then that information is then reviewed by Dr. Moore and Dr. Dixon Seahorn and Ms. Bressman as well. So they have access to that information.
This also allows them to see trends that might end up spawning training, whether things end up rising to his level or not. In fact, a lot of the training that he's put together has been born out of conversations that he's had either directly with administrators or trends that he's seen, or getting out ahead of trends that he thinks could be coming if not addressed, those undercurrents that are there as well.
If I can add one more thing, Dr. Vogler, the reporting system that we've developed for our administrators, that was done in consultation with our outside legal counsel, as well as for the training when we went through that. It was also developed in consultation with Mr. Capps as well. So it's gotten a nice lens of knowing that we're doing things in a way that support our administrators, and hopefully what we continue to see is a mitigation of risk. And then I serve in a consultant way to support those administrators so we can achieve, at least minimize to Ms. Graham's concerns, making sure we support our administrators.
Excellent.
Is there and I guess maybe where I was going with that, is there value or any value in pulling those numbers into this type of report so that when we see those, the 5 that do come to the forefront, we also see kind of what's going on in each building, also knowing that it's being dealt with, but we kind of have a sense of what's happening building to building.
Yeah, and sure, what I can suggest, because this is more of a public forum, if there's additional data that you'd like to take a look at, and maybe in a enclosed session or executive session, I'm happy to visit with you. But what I'm trying to be mindful of is to make sure if we dive into some of that information, we don't reveal information that could.
In other words, some complaints might be unique enough that even sharing it in the aggregate could cause.
They could be identified.
Yeah. So maybe what we can do is take a stab at a way to present that data, share it out in a Friday update or in a closed session at some point under executive content, see if that helps meet the need. And then if it is something that after pulling together and presenting isn't likely to be anything other than an aggregate reporting of pertinent data, then maybe we can fold that into this annual report in that form or fashion. And we'll just kind of have a conversation about what the best way is to get at the heart of that question to the satisfaction of the board.
Well, I think Kim Reeswell mentioned it. 5 seems like a low number, which it is. It's probably not for the ones that actually rose to a certain level, but there's some underlying things going on here and there that it would be nice to kind of see every once in a while, maybe. But I don't want to beat a dead horse, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
That's all right. We'll make a note of that. Dr. Smith and I will kind of strategize about ways to present that data so that it does maintain anonymity, and we'll take a shot at reporting that out, and then see if that's something that we can fold into the report annually.
So in terms of going forward, Dwayne, you mentioned that we adopted policy change last August. Do you expect there's additional conversations we need to have about any of that, or is that pretty clear and useful, and you can execute against it in a way that is reasonable and fair for everybody involved?
I think from a policy perspective, I think we're in a great place. I know some of the things that you all have discussed in the past with Dr. Tucker and with Dr. Moore and Dr. Dixon Seahorn is, I think one of the things that will support our district is our implementation of MTSS and our efforts with positive behavior intervention. Those things on the student side, the proactive work tends to support the growth and development of students. And so when things break down, at least my experience having been a high school administrator is when you don't always have those systems in place, when kids sometimes tend to struggle. And so I think the proactive work that we're doing right now, and I have had ongoing conversations with Dr. Moore, Dr. Dixon Seahorn, Dr. Meisenheimer, Dr. Martin, and the work we're doing right now going forward with MTSS, I think will help mitigate some of those things on the student side. I think if I understand that your question, we're beginning to do some of those things right now. And in fact, in August, when we come back, one of the trainings that we'll be presenting at Liberty North, either in virtual or in person, depending on how things continue to evolve, is we're going to be visiting with all of our building administrators about an area of the law called Child Find, and our obligations to ensure that we have systems and strategies in place to support kids. So that training is already on the books in August. So many of these things that you guys are thinking about, we've been considering, and I've been partnering with the folks within our academic services team for that very reason.
Great. Thank you.
Any additional questions for Dr. Vogelar or Dr. Smith?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Smith.
Thank you.
Thank you, HR, for that update. And again, we'll continue to look at reporting information to you and how best to bring that forward for the board's awareness. And again, appreciate the opportunity to include a compliance director. And so Dr. Smith has been a great addition to our district in terms of helping navigate a lot of various areas. So appreciate him and the skill set that he brings to the district. And thank you, Dr. Vogelar. Next item then, Mr. Rothman, is in and around the Grow Your Own. And so this is another HR item. So we're going to pivot again to HR. I'm going to share my screen and a brief slide deck that they have prepared for this item as well.
So thank you very much. While that pulls up, obviously you'll see the work now of a broader committee. Dee Rosecrans has been working very closely with Dr. Dixon Seahorn, and they head or chair a team of individuals that are really centered on the Grow Your Own Teacher program, identifying Liberty High School and Liberty North students of color who want to pursue a career in education. We scholarship them as an incentive to come back and teach in the district, and we are in our second year of that. So our first class of individuals are moving into their sophomore year, and you just in the last board meeting welcomed 4 other individuals who will be fanning out into their freshman year. So one of the things that I've talked extensively with Dr. Dixon Seahorn and Mr. Rosecrans about is we don't want this program to be one where we cut a check and pat them on the back and then hope to see them in 4 years. And so I've really challenged that group to build a scope and sequence that will follow those students as they matriculate college. And at the same time, we'll continue to tap into what we all believe is a large pocket of individuals in the school system that may be unaware of this scholarship opportunity, may be unaware of this program, to just expand that reach to our students. So in these 3 slides, we're going to talk about what GYOT 1.0 is looking like in terms of identification of our current students, and then what GYOT 2.0 is going to be looking like in terms of the year 1 and then year 2 and following support for kids as they go through that program. So marketing and promotion expansion obviously is a big part of reaching that, identifying those students. Right now, we've almost exclusively used word of mouth, although word of mouth is very effective, and even word of mouth from our existing recipients back to their underclassmen friends that they departed from has been a big source of advertising for this program. But even going beyond that, we have an EIP program currently. We are partners with Teach KC, which is a citywide endeavor through the Kauffman Foundation, and their interest survey allows us to identify students who have high interest in education, and we can sort that information by gender, by grade level, by ethnicity, by race, and then that gives us an opportunity to start connecting and building conversations with those kids and with their parents. As Dr. Moore commented on a few board meetings ago, this micro school credential is being developed right now that would tap into kids as early as their 9th grade year. They could engage in a track then that would take them through through their high school years, and they would walk out with 6 to 8 undergraduate credits toward a degree in education. Would allow us to start identifying kids even as early as ninth grade there. And then teacher ambassadors. This is a big passion for Dr. Dixon Seahorn and Mr. Rosecrans, and that's to help our secondary teachers develop a mindset about students that they see that possess those qualities and abilities that make for an effective school teacher, and having pointed conversations with them, and then sharing that connection then with a team of people who can further those conversations with those students as well. So Dr. Tucker, if you'll go to the next slide. So year 1 and year 2 and beyond are really the focus for our current GYOT students as they head to college and go through college. And it really is in the form of these professional growth and work opportunities, as well as mentoring and support. That's what the scope and sequence is about. For those who are in their first and second year of college, so they have fewer than 60 hours, there's opportunities for them to work in our school age care program and also be assistants in our summer school program. Because they lack 60 hours, they can't actually be employed to be a para or a summer school teacher, but they can substitute once they get that 60th hour and on. They can be a summer school teacher or a para or even substitute teach for the district. And so these are hands-on opportunities for them to engage in the school system as they work through college. Probably the key of the scope and sequence that Dr. Dixon Seahorn and Mr. Rosecrans and that entire team developed is the mentoring and support. So in year 1, it's a lot of relationship development. These students are connected with teacher mentors, and oftentimes these teacher mentors are the reason they're wanting to be an educator. So they identify a teacher relationship that made a significant difference in their decision to become a teacher. That teacher, of course, is delighted to continue that relationship. And so we make the connection with those students as they enter year 1. Year 1 is really around relationship development, deepening that relationship, helping them see that they've got a friend in the business. Also helping them understand and be equipped for the expectations of college, so conversations around that. There's virtual collaboration monthly in their scope and sequence, and then a twice annually face-to-face collaboration opportunity, all for the purpose in year 1 of really deepening that mentoring relationship. And then the final slide is year 2 and beyond. Once that relationship is developed, what does mentoring and support look like beyond that? And a lot of it is that professional development. So it's not just relationship building, but it's also professional learning. But it's not just a replication of what these students are encountering in their college program. It's more of the unique pieces of Liberty Public Schools that if a teacher could have coming in, would shorten that learning curve. And classroom management is a big part of that. Obviously, we emphasize through our mental health and wellness and the programs that we put in place through conscious discipline. Those things are unique to Liberty, and that pre-service candidates who come in and have a foundation in that are going to hit the ground running much more effectively than if they were solely dependent on their classroom management instruction at their colleges and universities. So that's a part of that. Technology integration is very unique in Liberty Public Schools. We don't just have devices, but we're flipping classrooms. We're really turning learning on its ear in terms of the technology integration. And so a unique and specific understanding of LPS technology integration is an important part of that year 2 and beyond. And then probably the most important, the conversation I had with Dr. Dixon Seahorn, she was really excited about, is our graduate profile is obviously unique to Liberty Public Schools, and those components of cultural, professional, academic, personal, and entrepreneurial priorities in that graduate profile is something that if a pre-service teacher could have coming in, it would significantly shorten that learning curve. And so that's a part of that year 2 and beyond mentoring relationship to help deepen both a commitment to Liberty Public Schools and then a readiness to enter Liberty Public Schools when they graduate college. Our hope is that all of this dissuades any of our students that we've selected from changing their mind about their major or just paying back the loan and teaching somewhere other than Liberty. Those are big parts of that program. I know that Mr. Rosecrans and Dr. Dixon Seahorn have an entire scope and sequence. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into that, they can get you a link to see that. Dee, Andrea, are there things you want to add that I didn't touch on in that brief overview?
I think you said it all. It was very well stated.
Why don't you talk a little bit before we field questions, a little bit about the process that you and the committee and the team went through to really try to ideate around and envision a broader application of that GYOT commitment through their 4 years of college.
Would you like to go first and I can add on, or?
Well, sure. the graduate profile, as Dr. Vogelaar talked about, is unique to the Liberty Public School District. Modeling by teachers is probably one of the most powerful tools in our communication with students. And what a wonderful, this graduate profile, I think, provides a wonderful set of guiding factors that the people who we hire as teachers, regardless of ethnicity, are modeling those very important parameters, because that sets the tone, that sets the climate for everything that we do on behalf of students. And so I really love the fact that we are taking a document such as that and making it live through our teachers, and hence enhancing students.
And I would just like to add that on behalf of the steering committee, that we're constantly ideating, constantly talking about how can we get better at getting better with the entire process. We have a timeline that we set at the very beginning of each year, and then even we tweak that timeline. Because sometimes you find in the middle of the process, oh, we didn't consider this or we didn't consider that. So one of the things that we had even put on the table as we were planning, just as late as April, was, hey, you know, as a team, we need to think about how can we better support the students even throughout the application process, in terms of, is there a time or place where we can have them maybe come over to the DAC and have all their paperwork laid out, and we can help them get it uploaded so that they feel as supported as possible during the process. We even thought about the fact, even in May, that, oh, if we can introduce our candidates to the board in a virtual space, then why can't we connect with the entire cohort group, the steering committee, with those year one and year two cohort members in a virtual space? And so that way we can have more frequent connections with students. So just know that we're constantly tweaking the process so that we can refine it, and so that this time next year, that process is even more enhanced, and so that we can better support our students and encourage them to definitely come back here to LPS and teach.
And what I love about this team, and specifically Dr. Dixon Seahorn and Mr. Rosecrans' leadership on, is a small group of people, right? And this is a big rock to carry. But as they've reached out to other players across the system, the responsiveness that they've been met with, you know, the whole education micro school credentialing, you know, that was really led by Dr. Moore in conversations with Melissa Taylor, one of the committee members, and the GYOT team. And so for them to ideate, as Dr. Dixon Seahorn mentioned, to vision cast with that steering committee, and then reach out recognizing that so much of accomplishing what they're dreaming about is in the hands of other people who are not on that team, or maybe not responsive to that team, but yet they are. They see the vision. It doesn't take long for them to catch the vision and to jump on board in helping further the success of that GYOT program. To me, that's probably one of the most exciting aspects of their leadership. Specifically, they can talk about this and vision cast in a way that is contagious, and that causes people to want to be a part of that work. So thank you, Dr. Dixon Seahorn and Mr. Rosecrans, for your leadership of that whole team on the committee. Questions that you have as board members that any of us can answer with regard to the follow-up that we have planned for those kids that are in the GYOT program?
I'd just like to say I really like the mentoring part of that, because I think that's so important for those students to have a touch point back at the district throughout. And teaching's not easy, and to be able to talk to somebody about what you're doing and any questions you might have to help you stay on course is a really great idea.
Yeah, I can't speak to whether teaching's easy like Angie can. It sure looks hard from the outside. And I remember one of the Teachers of the Year a year or two ago, I forget exactly which teacher it was that was influenced her, but I think it was in third grade or something. She kind of decided that this is a path she wanted to pursue based on watching that person work with her personally and in the classroom. And so I know there's young people who know well before they hit high school that this is something that they might be energized by. And I'm wondering if there's things, and Bob, you mentioned 4 years. I know there's a lot to get done to prepare you to be a teacher. Wondering if there's some things that we can be doing to help accelerate that for some of our kids. You know, I'd like to see these students back to the district as teachers. And there's things we can do to make it 3.5 years, 3 years. My niece just graduated from KU in 3 years. None of my kids were positioned to do that, and something I should have helped them with. But
well, and that is an excellent question. I think the micro-credentialing, the education micro-credentialing credential does have tremendous possibilities there. I mean, 8 hours doesn't sound like a lot, but when you couple that with our other dual credit and AP opportunities that we have available for students, it is possible for kids to come in as sophomores. And sophomores in their education program, zeroing in on those methodology classes much quicker. I don't know if it would equal a 3-year program. I think part of that is the gift of the student. You know, I don't know your nieces, but I do know KU is not a fluff school. So they came in with some raw materials that also made that a possibility. But we can shorten as much as possible that journey. I don't know if Dr. Dixon-Seahorn or Mr. Rosecrans, if you want to add to that at all. That work to try to shorten that span?
I would love to see that happen. So I think that that's another ideation that we can have about how can we make that happen in 3 years. But I was also thinking about just the substitute teaching opportunity, particularly for those that are local, that at least allows them maybe on those days when they don't have classes, once they reach the 60 college credit, then they can come back and at least get that experience. And that substitute teaching experience is very powerful.
Yeah.
Especially if you have mentors and you can go back to the classroom and say, I just experienced this. How do I apply my next semester's learning to?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Experience is the best teacher.
Well, and I look forward to the data that we can collect when they return and teach on just how shortened that learning curve feels to them in comparison to our other new teachers that come in that didn't have these kinds of supports. And certainly we can even springboard to ways we can support all teachers and have conversations. We've got over 30 university partnerships that we recruit from extensively, and we have conversations about how they can do their departments of education more effectively. And so there's even an opportunity to see how a program like this could be instituted more broadly to benefit all teachers.
I just have a quick question. How are their mentors chosen?
We ask the students themselves, the recipients themselves, and so they have great they have sole input into who that's going to be. I'm in the process of contacting our first cadre of folks to touch base with them again and dive a little bit on how that mentorship worked. Do they want to continue with the same person again for year 2? So, you know, this is a constant finger on the pulse of what's happening. And we do that in some simple ways, you know, by just picking up the phone or Zooming with them.
And I think because it is student initiated in the request, that it is very honoring for the teacher when we approach them. They say yes. We don't have to go back to the students and say, I'm sorry, your selection said no. And these teachers right now have no stipends. They have no remuneration for this role. And so we may be looking at that, and ought we change it, you know, honor and I guess just appreciation for being selected does carry you so far. But if we're expecting monthly collaboration and twice annually face-to-face, you know, we're amping up the expectation associated with that role as well. So.
And Bob, before you, just as an aside, as a Mizzou fan, KU is a fluff school.
I tried to hide my own bias, Scott. I
just wanted to clarify that.
What other questions do we have in and around grow your own teachers? Any other
I just have one quick question. We have a small group now, but as a and before I even say that, I'm really anxious for 4 years to pass so that we can actually see these kids in the classroom. So how are we gathering feedback from the participants and feeding that back into the system so that we can continue to make improvements?
Excellent question. Dee or Andre, you want to take that?
We hear through the mentors, and again, we will contact ourselves, either Andrea or myself, periodically. We'll pick up the phone or text or email just to see how now 8 will be doing. And that's something that we need to enhance. As I said, this is a constant monitoring, and I think it'll always be that way, not just because this is the first or second year, but you always want to make sure that the recipients of these services in this preparation are constantly being heard, being listened to, and then making micro adjustments along the way based upon what we hear.
One piece of informal feedback that that I know Dr. Dixon Seahorn shared with me the other day is that many of the applicants this year around indicated that they applied because the first class contacted them and said, you guys need to check this out, which indicates certainly their appreciation for the monetary side of this, but their belief that there is value even as they journey through college in this process. We can formalize that, that surveying beyond just mentor feedback. But ultimately, we don't want to lose anybody that we've selected. And so we're working hard. I say we, it really is this committee. They're the ones who should be propped up and appreciated for their work to ensure that we don't lose any of these folks that we're investing in and hoping will return and teach for us.
I think I'm thinking about 6 years out from now when we have 16 kids potentially all at one time. Is it still going to be feasible to reach out to them individually? And then as we're thinking about program evaluation in the future, what kind of touch points, and I'm not asking you to answer it now, but just kind of food for thought, what kind of touch points are we thinking about so that we can evaluate the program effectively?
Great suggestion.
I've written those questions down, Kim Marie, so that we can, as a steering committee, zero in on that. I do think that one very simple way to connect with the students is through, just informal surveys to get their feedback so we can continue to tweak things. Because like you said, we won't always be able to have the one-on-one touch point through phone calls or emails all the time. So I will continue to think of ways to keep them connected and for us to continue to engage with them.
Thank you.
The other piece to that you create, just as we've seen with like our Northland CAPS graduates, is you have alumni that then enter into the system that then turn around and give back or support kind of in arrears those high school students that are graduating, getting ready to embark. So not only do you have that mentor with a teacher that a high school student has selected, but then you also have this entire new group of cohort or alumni that then kind of backfill and support the system and the structure. So appreciate everyone's efforts in that regard. Other questions around grow your own teachers? The only thing I would share in addition to this is that this is a little bit of a test bed, so to speak, particularly in and around micro-credentialing, as we think about opportunities for students to not only work through a series of modules or experiences, but then also showcase their learning. And so if we take this concept as it's applied to education and then expand that so that it reflects the skills and dispositions on the graduate profile, that's really what we're working to reward. How can we create micro-credential opportunities geared around the skills and dispositions within the profile that then are afforded around those real-world learning experiences that come in a variety of forms and in a variety of industries. So again, this is a little bit of a pilot as we develop this micro-credential approach, but then hopefully you'll see that expand into a lot of other areas or industries or businesses, pursuits that then are anchored in that skills and dispositions piece tied to the graduate profile. So hopefully you'll see more of that in the coming months and years ahead. So I think that concludes that item, Mr. Rothman.
Okay, then we'll move on to budget update.
The next item is our budget piece as we continue to bring information forward for you over the course of the spring. I know Cindy relayed a lot of that in her update earlier, but we will turn it back over to Cindy if there's anything else you want to add.
I did want to mention that I heard from the county assessor's office late last week. I should have assessed valuation preliminary numbers late this week. So that drives about 50% of our operating revenue. So we'll have a better picture of that late this week, what we expect from that, as well as maybe some information today. Other than that, we are continuing to update next year's budget as we get new information from budget managers. So from that regard, everything you get on June 30 will be as up to date as it has ever been for you when you approve that budget.
I appreciate Cindy mentioning the local revenue stream as far as taxes and kind of what we're looking at moving forward. As you know, we set the tax rate in August. If history is any tell to what we're probably getting ready to embark on over the course of the next 2 to 3 years, back in 06, 07, most districts saw a very steady increase in their assessed valuation. And then as many of you recall, that came to a complete stop or halt at either zero or negative growth. And so as we were looking at those figures just a few days ago, you saw a decline overnight in terms of assessed valuation increases. And then it really took a period of about 8 to 10 years before you even got anywhere close to recovering to the extent of those increased growth in terms of assessed valuation. And so we'll be watching that closely as data is shared with us. We'll pass that along to you all, anticipating setting our tax rate in August. And something to keep in mind is, Cindy mentioned earlier, we have held a near 99%, if not a little bit higher, collection rate as it relates to local assessment and taxes paid. You'll likely see a decline in that as it relates to a percentage reduction or 2 or 3 in terms of the overall collection rate. And we really won't know that until the close of this calendar year. So those are items just to be mindful of as it relates to the local piece. Questions tied to the budget for Cindy?
Yes, AJ Bird. Cindy, I just wanted to clarify, did you say the county revenue was down about 1.5%, or was there another number? I didn't quite hear you.
No, that is correct. I did say our collection rate this year for FY20 is down approximately 1.5%.
Does that give you any kind of indication as to what it might look like based upon what happened in 2009, or is there any way to project?
Well, we do look back at that historical rate, and actually back in 2008-9, our rate did not dip like this at that point. So we're experiencing something that does not mirror history right now. So I don't think that bodes necessarily well either. If we're seeing a decline right now, I would anticipate, as Dr. Tucker indicated, that next year we could see a little additional decline over 1.5% collection, possibly.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions on the finance side for Cindy? That concludes that item then.
We'll move on to 2.05, the reentry planning.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, we shared with our strategic leadership team a slide deck that really was just kind of an overview of considerations regarding reentry and reopening. As I'm sure you have seen in your inbox, there are a variety of associations, organizations, vendors that are pushing out information on how best to reopen schools. So there's no loss or lack of information and resources that are out there. So it's really been a task of trying to surface those that are the most useful and meaningful, and then cull through those as it relates to a variety of considerations that districts should take into account. So I put a crosswalk together, shared a slide deck or presentation with our strategic leadership team, walked through that presentation for about an hour with the sole purpose of really trying to level set everyone, because what we've realized is that people have differing perspectives and expectations for the fall. I know you're surprised by that. And at the same time, differing levels of exposure to information that's out there. So if you're not fairly well versed, you might solely hone in on one example or one particular resource that may or may not fit our context. And so a couple of key resources that we've leaned on, certainly the Missouri School Boards Association and the resources that they put out. There was a little bit of a public relations snafu, and that as that was released, many people viewed that as the entire plan for the state of Missouri, when really the School Boards Association intended that solely to serve as a resource. And they have since clarified that by amending their document and putting a disclaimer in there that districts will not be able to fulfill or are required to complete all of those expectations or considerations. In addition to the MSBA document, Opportunity Labs has put together a very good resource that was pushed out through the American Association of School Administrators. In addition to that piece, McKinsey Consulting pushed out a document that really took a look at perspectives across the world and how different nations and school systems were re-entering into their school year. And so that is a useful piece as well. They also provide quite a bit of information for leaders to consider in and around scenario planning. And then the last resource that bubbled up was really one from Education Elements and how to go about kind of the structures and systems and processes to put in place for reopening and reentry planning. The last thing that I would share, and this actually developed after that slide deck was put together, was a resource that we've utilized in our strategic planning process, and that is from the Education Advisory Board. And so several of us attended or participated in a webinar in and around reentry and reopening planning. Fast forward to last week, the Board of Education was provided a condensed version of that presentation. If you had an opportunity, it's about a 30-minute slide deck and voiceover of me just walking through at all of those considerations that we are looking at this point. Fast forward, you will eventually see the plan as to reentry and reopening for the fall. But prior to that, there are a lot of components that we have been working on in real time, whether it's return to work for our 12-month employees that started this week, whether it's preparation for summer school in the month of June, or whether it's the possibility of sitting face-to-face with students in the month of July, in and around summer school options if the county health department allows us to do that and the virus is performing at a better level than it is today. Those are the pieces that we're working on real time and working toward that reentry, reopening first day of school on August 25th. With that said, tremendous thanks to everyone on this call because you've all played a role in this process, whether it's the questions you've asked, the resources that you've pushed, or the time spent in steering and navigating discussions, committees, and agendas. I wanted to turn it over to Steve Anderson to be able to give kind of a broad overview of that work in partnering with operations, but then at the same time bringing in the academic services side, knowing that the questions that parents have for us is what will school look like later on in the fall. So Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, and I appreciate that overview. And I can't stress enough and really thank enough all the various individuals that have been really kind of neck deep in some of these planning efforts. As you can imagine, with all the various touch points and areas that we're trying to cover off and coordinate between, much of the work of that group or the leadership group, again, there's probably about 25 of us, I think, in various committees. They're just making sure that we're coordinating well, but also as part of that work, haven't been able to really spend a lot of time kind of up at a higher level in terms of kind of an overall vision for the work. And so that's where I think certainly appreciate Dr. Tucker's work in pulling that together and sharing it with you all. It's definitely worth a look for you to kind of get some perspective in terms of how that overall vision is being coordinated. That being said, there's with time and deadlines and a lot of things kind of pressing, we've been really kind of at it, especially looking at some of the ones that are up and coming. And summer school has been garnering a lot of our attention. Certainly reentry to work, some of the athletics and fine arts work getting ready for mid-June through July has required quite a bit of work and coordination as well. I thought what I would do is just end real briefly and kind of explaining what we've tried really to do to set a foundation to all that various work kind of at an operating level, procedures level, in the various areas that we focused on and trying to work closely with the county, CDC, of course, our internal folks, talking to other districts across the metro, and other resources that are available to us, CDC, I think I mentioned that, really establishing some operating procedures as it relates to distancing and personal hygiene and masks, capacity standards, stable environments, cleaning and sanitization procedures, high-risk population and how to kind of manage and handle that, daily screening procedures, signage and accommodations, and then of course positive test procedures and mitigation. And so we've tried to develop, or we are developing, and I think are getting close to really kind of landing those various areas and how we're going to handle that as we move forward and move towards the fall. So expect something there probably in the next week or two where you'll get a sense of how that work will be coordinated over time. But as we start to land the plans for the ones that I've mentioned, which are really kind of going to be coming to a head here in the next week, we also have a committee that's hard at work on fall. And of course, that's going to be the bigger lift for all of us. And so I think we've gotten off to a good start. We've got the right people at the table, and we'll certainly be updating you along the way. But essentially, we're looking at a couple different scenarios, not knowing how things are going to stand in August. And that will be, certainly there'll be a virtual component to that. We will also plan in case we're at a point where 100% capacity is allowed, and how we can, assuming the pandemic is still in play, how we can kind of safely operate in and around that. But then in the middle of that, you have kind of a blended environment. And so we're looking at one or two scenarios within that blended environment as we begin to kind of pull together some initial plans for all four of those scenarios. So again, there's certainly work to be done and updates to be had. But I think right now we've kind of begun to lay a pretty good foundation. We have the right people at the table. And I think we have a pretty good idea of the direction we're heading. It's just how we pull it all together. So again, thanks to many of the folks that you're looking at here are very involved in this work, and just appreciate all their efforts to that end.
Before we open it up for questions then, Dr. Westphal, anything to add from your end on the academic services side?
The only thing I think I would add is to let you know that we're working on some instructional guidelines to help our teachers understand the differences between all the three scenarios that Mr. Anderson is talking about, so that we can really guide our teachers in how to prioritize their instruction, because we've done quite a few now teacher interviews and student interviews to figure out what things have worked and what things that we really need to address. And we're continuing those through the summer. And so I think every time I sit down with kids, it's just incredibly illuminating for me to make sure that we're addressing where the rubber meets the road. And so I think all those aspects of the instructional components that we've heard about through Let's Talk, that you all have been hearing about over the fence, right? That we really want to make sure that we address those issues as we step into the next possibilities. And so we're definitely taking that very seriously and listening to everyone who comes to us about how we can make sure that intersection really does work as well as we can make it, considering the circumstances.
And to kind of add to that, if you had a chance to view the Vimeo in terms of the considerations, there's a little bit more detail put into the academic service considerations in and around what learning looks like in the fall. So keep in mind, we're really working from three buckets, as Steve and Jeanette shared. The first one is fully face-to-face. The other bookend on the other side of that spectrum, let's say, would be completely virtual. That would be an instance in which perhaps we are sheltered in place again and learning from home because the pandemic has kind of reared its head again and the virus continues to spread and cases have increased. And then in the middle, you have a variety of options or a blend of options. And so what we've looked at is, irregardless of how we start in August, you will need to, as a classroom teacher, be ready to facilitate both a face-to-face option as well as a virtual option. And so best case scenario, we start with some semblance of face-to-face on August 25th and begin laying the groundwork for our students and families, parents and teachers, that, hey, we can quickly pivot to a virtual environment. And so what does it look like to support both the traditional face-to-face, but then that virtual piece? Where the middle space is in terms of hybrid or blended models is really where we're trying to hone in on what is the most likely outcome or scenario that we will face in the fall, be it at the elementary level, the middle level, or the high school level, so that by the time you've unpacked all of those options or choices for parents, you're really working at about 10 to 12 different options because you're, again, focused on the early childhood and elementary side, the middle level side, and the high school side with a variety of choices or scenarios. So again, I appreciate everyone's efforts in and around this. As more develops and the detail gets put in place around this skeleton, we'll have a better glimpse as to what this looks like. The other thing that I would share is we're not doing this in isolation. So it's working with a variety of associations, with our Department of Ed, with Clay County Health Department, City of Kansas City, but then also with a variety of districts across the metro area, Missouri, as well as the Kansas side. Last Friday, the Kauffman Foundation facilitated a call of about 50 school districts or 50 school district leaders. And on that call, the discussion was, what are you thinking as far as instructional models for the coming school year? And our description of what our reentry and reopening planning and how that's unfolding was very similar to what other districts are looking toward. The other piece that I would share in and around that regional collaboration is a desire to ensure that we are surveying and hearing from both students, from staff, as well as families. And so for Liberty Public Schools, we have now at least, I can think of 3 different surveys or touch points where we've solicited input from students, staff, and parents. Whether it was midstream, about 4 weeks in, as to how things were going in the 4th quarter, whether it was preparation for summer school and people's intent in the month of June and July and their comfort level to continue virtually or face-to-face. So should the health department allow for that? Most recently, which was last week, pushing another survey out to students, staff, and families to be able to solicit feedback on how their experience went over the 4th quarter, plant the seed for some of these options that we've talked about this morning, but then also gauge their readiness for return in the fall, whether they're comfortable in returning fully face-to-face, virtually, and some who are hesitant and indicated that they did not want to return until a vaccine is available to ensure that their children are safe. We will continue to have those kind of pulse checks with our community to see where they're at over the course of the summer. So you can anticipate more surveys being conducted as we roll into the summer, and then eventually shoring up those plans and soliciting from parents what they want to choose for the fall as the school year convenes. We'll bring that information to you as we close out this current survey, but then certainly over the course of the summer to give you a chance to get the feedback and see what our community is sharing around expectations and readiness for the fall. Questions in and around re-entry or reopening for Mr. Anderson or Dr. Westfall?
Yes, Dr. Westfall. You talked about the instructional guidelines for your teachers. How are we relaying this or sharing this with parents who are actually in the home serving as teachers? Is there any way we're preparing them with any kind of instructional guidelines?
You know what, that's a great question, AJ. We started this summer, with some parent professional development. And so that's a super help to the parents who are engaging with us. But part of what we recognized, and I haven't actually, I was thinking about this. I talked with Nick about this earlier, that when I get to talk to the kids and the students, that's really been my connection point. But perhaps I do need to reach out to the elementary parents, because that's really been where our, students that are K1, 2 need more help with the parents, especially in devices and logons. I talked to a parent yesterday from Ridgeview who told me that she didn't understand how to use a Chromebook, and when her daughter got frustrated, she just decided not to know how to do it, right? So that was a really nice crossover, where she said, if I knew, I could help. So like what Dr. Dixon Seahorn said earlier, we do have some courses that are coming out, and in the process trying to figure out what it is that our parents would like to have, because asking them to take courses is asking them to do one more thing. Mm-hmm. So I'm just trying to mitigate what that looks like and find out really where that will be. I do feel like when I tell people that, I want more information about reentry, and so we're designing that right now. So let me just wrap back around. Yes, we, one, recognize that our parents need some support in that. Two, it is our hope that at least bringing our students back in for some portion of face-to-face will help that process. So we want to make sure that we have those two things connected, and then we prioritize, and then our guidelines will have that part in there. But we do have a lot of resources that are available now that I'm not sure, we don't have a way to trap who's accessing it and who's not. So I know that's kind of a circle about in your answer. I don't mean to be vague. It's just there's so many touch points out there, it's hard to figure out where, unless I call people directly, which I have been doing. So I am calling every day and talking to parents. So, and well, to the children, but I get to the parents first. So.
Well, it's just good to know that you're thinking about it and that is a need.
Yes, thank you. We are super trying, I promise.
Thank you.
The other thing I would share in working with a lot of other districts on this issue, both regionally and across the state, that's probably the most disheartening thing, is to take a look at the overall state and what districts are able to do versus what they're not able to do. And so granted, we have one-to-one, we have the opportunity or ability to fold out, devices should a family need, Wi-Fi access, and we can support the children in that respect. There are a lot of districts, some even within our area, some that are bigger than us, that are not fully one-to-one. And so over the fourth quarter, their experience was printing paper packets to be able to send home to families, or making decisions to literally just shut down learning for a portion of the fourth quarter, or maybe a little earlier than they anticipated. So what we see across the state is that spectrum as well on how districts have been able to respond, some at their own choosing, some out of their circumstance. And so as we think about the fall, we can do what we can do, but then how can we do it better in terms of a version 2.0, if not 3.0, from what we did earlier in the fourth quarter. That parent engagement, as we've learned, is incredibly important. But at the same time, hearing students' voices and staff voices, just so that we can stay in constant contact and revise and revise and revise and revise our efforts that we've been working towards. So, other questions for Mr. Anderson or Dr. Westphal? Thank you all.
All right. 2.06 organizational structure chart.
So this is an item that we've been working on for some time as well. And I want to start by giving you a little bit of a backstory. I appreciate everyone's feedback on this as we've connected and talked through how best to situate our district for the future in support of our children, our students, our learners. But I want to start where kind of this conversation really began. And shortly after Dr. Heidi passed away earlier in the spring, we convened a conversation with our executive directors and academic services in my office. And I remember it very well because they all looked at me like I was crazy. And I really just threw out the question and I asked, what would it look like at that point if we did not fill the assistant superintendent of academic services and instead focused on the three executive directors working together as a team within academic services and the other directors in moving forward, really focusing on that teamwork piece, really focusing on kind of flattening the structure within that department as well as our entire district to be interdependent. And so after having had some conversations there, we kind of tabled that idea and instead went to this notion of just filling that assistant superintendent position as is. Worked with the human resources department to post that, had that out for several weeks. We got several candidates or applicants that submitted their information by way of the portal. And then around spring break, as you all know, the pandemic hit. That then caused us over the next several weeks to change and revisit that discussion, that conversation as to whether or not we wanted to go ahead and fill it as is or go back to the drawing board. And so where we landed on that was to close that vacancy, reintroduce the idea of reorganizing and changing up the structure within academic services to be able to support the district moving forward. I think the only reason why this is a possible option for us is that we have three incredibly capable executive directors who already work well together, who have unique strengths and skill sets that complement one another. And so as we went to the drawing board, really wanted to recommend to the Board of Education that we abandon, so to speak, those executive director roles, rebrand the academic services department. And so what we've brought forward this morning for consideration as we've had these conversations over the last couple of weeks is rebranding the academic services department to innovation and learning, creating 2 positions within that department, one of which would be assistant superintendent for instructional design. That would be Dr. Westfall. The second position within academic services would be the creation of an assistant superintendent role over learning and learning communities. That would be Dr. Moore, appointed to that position. And then thirdly, the creation of a chief equity officer, which would come in the appointment of Dr. Dixon Seahorn. I wish we had the complete design build to be able to share that with you, but we are missing a couple of components. And those are the fully developed, fully completed job descriptions, of which Dr. Vogelaar is working on with his team and Christelle Morgan. We're looking at all 3 of those job descriptions to identify what those roles and responsibilities are. And then we'll bring those forward for the board upon final approval at our June 30 meeting. The other piece to this is that there obviously, because of role and responsibility changes, there are some salary implications that you saw reflected in recommendations to salary schedules at our last board meeting. As far as the physical design of the organizational chart, I'm going to share that with you here briefly. It's reflected on our current structure in terms of kind of that sideways bracket that you're used to seeing. But what we intend to do, we've already started conversations with our graphic design folks to be able to change this up, and we'll provide you with an example of that as it's brought forward. But really moving away from a hierarchical structure to where it is much more interdependent, has a creative design to it. And so you can kind of envision a circular graphic that shows our learners at the center, surrounded by some of these other areas or some of these other components, starting with the community at the top and the Board of Education, followed by myself and those that work closest with me, that being Sandra and Dallas in their respective roles. We had some initial conversation as to where to place the equity piece. We initially had it up here. But one of the conversations with board members that surfaced over the last several days was the value in ensuring that all 3 of our chiefs, as well as all 3 of our assistants, are captured within that cabinet layer. One of the advantages of doing that, then, is institutionalizing that position of the assistant superintendent for learning and leadership, the assistant superintendent in respect to instructional design, the chief equity officer piece, so that is locked in irrespective of a superintendent coming or going, or board members coming or going as well. And so that institutionalizes those positions. The other thing that we've talked about within cabinet is that as you look at these 6 individuals, and then myself included, there is a clear delineation when it comes to items that are brought forward to the board in and around closed session. And so just as we've done in past closed sessions, not every member of cabinet will be present to share, legal items or personnel items or real estate or student matters, but instead will be brought forward kind of on an as-needed basis to relay information to the board. So that is our intent moving forward with that structure. Beyond that, I wanted to give you another glimpse into the innovation and learning side as it relates to that department. Because that has kind of an impact there as well, is those individuals are assigned and supervised by both Dr. Moore and Dr. Westfall. These look like they're pretty lofty roles, pretty lofty positions in their direct reports, and they certainly are. But that is something that we will want to monitor over the course of this year with their assistance in terms of navigating that piece. As it relates to the chief equity officer role, being able to hone in on those roles and responsibilities in that position is truly a new position, albeit we have work moving forward through our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, as well as the explicit capturing of equity-related focus areas within our strategic plan. So I don't think there's any lack of work to be done. If anything, Dr. Dixon Seahorn and I are already talking about, here's the array of the work that needs to be accomplished. How do we really hone in and prioritize those efforts? The interesting piece around the equity effort is that it may seem as though it is a narrowing of focus for Dr. Dixon Seahorn, which in part it is, but if anything, it's broadening that reach, because the vision for this position is that it not just sits within academic services, but instead, in all conversations that we have, be it a nutrition services department conversation, to the academic services side, to human resources, operations, perhaps even in an audit and finance conversation, there's a role for equity to play to make sure that we're providing access and opportunity as we think about the work of our system in support of all learners. And so as this develops, we'll certainly bring pieces to you. The final piece is certainly in the adoption of our budget as it relates to schedules and salary and job descriptions, roles and responsibilities. But we wanted to seek your approval to begin that transition and reorganizing so that we can begin this work, particularly in around reentry and reopening plans, but then effectively the roles don't formally start until July 1st. So with that said, I'll step back and then certainly entertain any questions that you all may have.
We have questions for Dr. Tucker. This is for action if once any questions are answered.
I think this is something that's on your radar, Jeremy, but I am very supportive of the structure that you have outlined here. I think it leverages the gifts of the folks involved. One of the things that I think that is good of that is there's a team that already knows how to work together and is well-oiled. But I also think we missed then the opportunity of bringing some new ideas and some new energy and some new perspective. So I hope that going forward there'd be an opportunity to fold in folks from around the district and give them growth opportunities, whether it's formal new role assignments or ad hoc kinds of assignments. I think my recollection is to the district office, it was a great opportunity for him to grow and take more back to Heritage than what he had left with. So just help figure out how to let everyone in the team grow through this when we've taken a couple of things off the table.
Yes, absolutely. And a couple things to point out. As we move these three positions within the org chart and rebrand the department, one of the things that I did was I connected with each of the academic services directors over a period of several days to relay those changes to them. Of course, as soon as you talk to one, the word gets out a little bit. But in those conversations with them, I wanted to also reiterate that there will be an opportunity over the course of this year to really assess and reflect on the total work of the department, particularly in lieu of a new normal. Sorry to use that phrase, but we cannot continue our organizational structure to support an archaic design. And so as we think about different designs, we think about new opportunities, we think about expanding real world learning, we think about more virtual opportunities to learn online and from home and in the workplace, we've got to rethink our entire structure. And so that really comes in the form of giving these leaders the opportunity to reassess the innovation and learning department, leverage people's strengths. I shared with the directors, I said, I don't want you to take this as job threatening, but if it's anything, it's putting it back on the entire department to look at opportunities to rethink. I think through those conversations and monitoring both the equity piece, the instructional design piece, the learning communities piece, we'll see whether that has stretched these three individuals, and if we can come back in and support them in some other way, like you shared, whether it's ad hoc opportunities, of which we've done that before, or the creation of another position down the road. The other thing that's interesting about this is while at the same time you're navigating a pandemic, you have increased racial tensions across the nation. The third element that has inserted itself is budget reductions. Any of those individual items by themselves are overwhelming. When you add those three pieces together, it's incredibly overwhelming. And so I say all that to say a byproduct of this reorganizational chart is cost savings to the tune of about $150,000. We hope that that is temporary in support of learners and support of the district, and that at whatever point we're able to bring back additional support, and we do this annually as we assess the org chart, we will certainly do that and inform the board our progress over the course of the year. So I appreciate that comment, David.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I'll say too is I think this is long coming, and one thing I guess that I would ask, and perhaps I'll compliment it as well. I like the fact that we come together when we've got a job opening, we reassess, we take a look at what's right. Do we just need to fill that job, or do we need to maybe reallocate resources or create new positions, which I think is a great outcome of this. But the other piece of it is, and it feels like we would have done this, or it would have been the right thing for us to do as a district, regardless of if we had the individuals who we were placing in those positions. It's just fortunate circumstance for us that we've got great talent that's able to fill these three roles in particular. Is that kind of a correct assessment?
It absolutely is. And one of the early conversations that we had with Human Resources, Dr. Vogelaar and I, was really starting with board policy and looking at the creation of these positions and the appointment of existing leaders within the system to those positions as we collapse the positions they are vacating. So Dr. Vogelaar, do you want to speak to that real briefly in respect to kind of how we're positioned to be able to put that in place? And as you mentioned, Nick, it really is our opportunity given the talent that we have within our leadership ranks.
Yeah, I think that's what I would add to it. Obviously, taking into account the people that would be filling these roles, you look at what their skill set is, what their gifting is, what their passions are, and you are able to lay that over where your gaps are in your organization. You see a really good fit. It doesn't create a situation where all gaps are left uncovered or that the work is equally distributed, because you also have the competing variable of looking at the uncertain funding picture and wanting to kind of solve that problem as well. And so it is this ebb and flow really of taking all of these variables, and you're laying that lens over a problem that you're wanting to solve in a way that also allows you to seize an opportunity that you may not otherwise be able to seize if you don't do that analysis.
Thanks, Dr. Vogelaar. Other questions or comments?
Yeah, I just have one comment. I am particularly excited about the addition of a role that's focused specifically on diversity and equity. And to Nick's point, we needed to add that position for some time, and we're just lucky that we have someone who is gifted to be able to take that on. I think as a board, if that role is being done right, we will see some troubling of the narrative in our system, and we just need to be prepared to support that work and whatever outcomes come of it.
Thank you.
Yes, comment. I think there was some literature we were reading from about policy driving behavior, and I think that's what we're doing here. Is we recognize there are inequities in our district, and know there's work to be done. And so I think that's the difference, is we've been proactive. And as Dr. Vogelaar just mentioned, seizing the opportunity. It brought itself to us, and we're taking advantage of it. So I think this is the way to move forward. And I'm excited about the potential can come out of these various roles and changes.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
We're ready for a motion then.
I move the board to authorize the superintendent to move forward with the restructuring of the executive director positions currently in the academic services department.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing and hearing nothing, we're ready for a vote, please.
AJ,
You're muted.
Yeah.
There you go.
you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Angie,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Kim Marie,
Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you, everyone.
We've got 2.07. We've got some board business. There's 2 documents there. Do you want to share your screen, Dr. Tucker?
You bet.
For the board meetings first, I guess. This is the time of year when we've typically done a retreat, but because we're still handling things by Zoom, I think we just discussed potentially moving that either into late summer or early fall. This is the proposed meeting dates then for moving forward after today. We already had the 30th on our radar. I think that there was another session added on an as needed basis for June, and as well as a couple of additional study sessions that we wouldn't normally do. Dr. Tucker, do you want to speak to what those might look like if they're needed?
Yeah, and you can see that in placeholder on the 16th of June, as well as in early July around the 9th. Typically, as you'll recall, we forego our study session in July and August, and then reconvene those study sessions in September. We really feel as though it would be beneficial rather than go from today up until June 30th without the opportunity to engage with the board. The need to put something down in the middle of June, keeping in mind that our most prominent topics would then end up being budget, as well as reentry and reopening planning. As you've seen over the course of the fourth quarter, we're sending frequent updates for the board's awareness on issues as they come up or the work that we incur or work on daily. We will continue to do that. But as we know more on the budget front, but then as we begin to shore up those reentry and reopening plans for the fall and what school will look like, we want to ensure we're bringing that to you for your feedback, your input, action when needed on a variety of items. So then fast forward, we do that in July, our regular meeting then being on July 21st. And then by the time the study session rolls around, hopefully we have some semblance as to what that looks like for the first semester. And then on the right-hand side, going from there into the second semester of next year. This can certainly be modified depending upon the need of the hour, but at the same time, we wanted to make sure and get these placeholders in your calendars so that you can anticipate the lift as a board member entering into the summer as well as into this next year.
So if all of you will put those on your radar, if you know now that you've got some conflicts, if we could maybe go through Sandra to coordinate to make sure we don't have any quorum issues. And David, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, quick clarification. We're aiming for July 7th or 9th.
Good point. I was going to ask that too. That's a Thursday versus the typical Tuesday.
We had thought about the 9th for the sole purpose of moving it a little bit further away from our previous meeting. So from June 30th, we could certainly keep it on the 7th. That's a pretty quick turnaround with the holiday weekend thrown in between with people that may have plans. So then just administratively, we talked about moving it to that Thursday just to spread it out a little bit more and give us time to prep for that particular agenda.
Okay, because the calendar shows the 7th and the.
I got it. I see that.
Yeah, and August calendar days aren't reflecting accurately either.
Okay,
I think
we can look at that to make sure that it meets the top piece. So if you'll go by the top portion, sorry about that.
Thursday is the plan then.
Yeah, I see that.
Got it. Okay.
So if we get calendar invites out for those and we can all take a moment to RSVP, then we'll know if we've got any conflicts that it's going to result in any quorum issues pretty quickly, especially as it relates to the
Next 2 months.
5 or 6 upcoming summer dates. Anyone have any other questions or comments on this? All right, then if we could look at the board responsibilities. The document uploaded is what the what it did for the current year, and is the TIF the only one that we actually have to vote on?
I believe that is correct, yes.
And when does that, would we do that now, or would that be something that?
We can do it at a later meeting.
I mean, it's fine. I mean, we can complete this now and do it now. I just didn't know if we needed to.
We typically do that later. We go through and do the assignments, and then if we can come back in August, that way we will share that information with the communities.
Okay. All right. So with respect to any of the assignments, I don't know if we want to go through each of these as we have in the past, or if everyone wants to maintain what we've already have in place, or if anyone's interested in trading a particular school or organization that they've been. I'm open to whichever method.
I don't have a huge opinion one way or another. I mean, the only thing I'll say is I've been with Warren Hills for the last 2 years and have loved getting to do that, but also understand if other people would like to begin to get into seeing Warren Hills or other schools, happy to trade as well.
The only one I would kind of like to have this year is Heritage, but I'm a no. Do you still have kids there, Andy?
No, I was about to say I've got a college freshman now, which is weird to say, and a high school sophomore. So I no longer have an elementary or middle level child. So I am fine if anyone wants Heritage. I will trade.
Yeah, the young man that I've mentored for a couple of years is at Heritage now, so I wouldn't mind having that, but up to the group.
Fine. Do you want me to then do Liberty Oaks or Shoal Creek?
Mr. Rothman, if board members would like to send information to me, I can put it together and send it back out to everyone, and then we can fill in as we go if you aren't ready to do this today.
Whatever works easiest for everyone. I'm fine if we do this now, or I'm fine if everyone wants to just email Sandra with any that they want to switch around. That's everyone's preference. You want to take the time to do it now, or now that it's about 9 o'clock, if other people have other commitments, we can handle it by email? Why don't we go ahead and do that then, since we've been at it for a couple hours. And I think admin has some meetings coming up. I think somebody mentioned Governor doing something here pretty soon. So why don't you each take a look at that document and just send emails to Sandra with preferences. And I would assume then if you don't get an email from anyone in particular, they're fine staying where they're at. How about that?
Ed and I then on Friday send out what I have and fill in with the current year for those I do not have.
Perfect. So we'll handle it that way. And then I think we are ready for a motion to adjourn then.
Can we mention one other thing real quickly under board business? We've had conversations administratively about the need to go ahead and recognize a few members of the class of 2020 that graduated but then are leaving the community for a variety of reasons. We've heard examples of missions trips where they're heading off on their mission internationally. We've heard of other examples of students that are just transferring out of state for employment or college early, as well as several that are entering the armed services. So appreciate Dr. Adams, Dr. Kurth, Dr. Moore working on options for us, and wanted to allow Dr. Moore to relay those plans engage your availability as you hear about these and are interested in participating, of course, with appropriate social distancing and precautions in place. But I'll turn over to Dr. Moore to kind of wrap us up as far as that board business piece.
When we surveyed our senior students and parents, we had 90% who said they could make a July commencement ceremony, and we decided we wanted to really look at that 10% and see how we could recognize them. And so we came together last week and came up with an abbreviated commencement ceremony that would take place here very soon at each high school. So the plan is on June 11th to have a ceremony at Liberty North High School at 7 p.m. and on June 12th to have a ceremony at Liberty High School, 7 p.m. same time. As of right now, we sent out a survey yesterday to the parents and students asking who would need to attend that commencement based on the reasons that Dr. Tucker shared with you. They have until Thursday at the end of the day to sign up. And right now it's a very small group of like 11 students, but I think that that'll grow a little bit. And so what we would like to do is on each of those days, have the students come in, and based on the number of students that are there, we might do it in 2 shifts. It might be 1, it might be 3, but have an abbreviated, they come in. The principal would speak. We would like to have a board member speak as well, Dr. Tucker, and then the student council president. If we have any students in that group who are valedictorians, salutatorians, or have some kind of honors, we will recognize that. They'll come into music, and then we'll do a shortened ceremony. They'll walk across the stage, get their diploma, and then they'll be able to get pictures afterwards, hopefully with David Dice or someone else who will be there to take their picture. And then if we have the need to have another group so that we can socially distance, we would do that. So we might repeat it a couple of times. We may just do it once if the group remains where it is now. But we would love to have, it's up to you if you'd like to come to both, but if we could at least have 1 or 2 board members at each ceremony, and have Andy or Kimberly or anyone else who would be willing to speak at that ceremony, that would be lovely as well. So I will send you the information through Sandra and see your availability and who can be there, and then we can plan on who will be able to speak at those events.
Julie, what was the second date for Liberty High School? I didn't get that.
Liberty High School is June 12th at 7 p.m.
Thank you.
I think that then concludes the board business, but again, keep an eye out for that information from Dr. Moore. And we look forward to celebrating with these individual students and their families as they embark on what's next. So thanks, everyone.
All right. And now we're ready for a motion to adjourn. And there is no closed session today.
That's correct.
So we're just straight up adjourning. Anyone?
I move the board adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second. Ready for a vote, please?
AJ,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Angie,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Marie,
Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
motion carries.
We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Right.